Animal Farm by George Orwell. Episode 6. Narrated by Wormhole Podcast. All that year, the animals of Animal Farm worked harder than they had ever worked before. But here's the thing. They were happy about it. Or at least they told themselves they were. Every aching muscle, every exhausted evening, felt meaningful because they believed they were building something for themselves. No more working to fill a human's pockets, they reminded themselves. No more serving ungrateful masters who took everything and gave nothing back. This time, every drop of sweat would water their own future. Through spring and summer, they worked 60 hours every week. Then Napoleon, the farm's leader, announced that Sundays would now include afternoon work sessions too. It was voluntary, of course, but any animal who skipped it would have their food cut in half. The biggest project was the windmill, Napoleon's grand vision for the farm's future. Once completed, it would grind corn, generate electricity, and make their lives easier than any animal had ever dreamed. At least, that was the promise. But building it was brutally hard. The limestone had to be broken into usable pieces, and animals simply aren't built to swing pickaxes. They can't stand on two legs and use tools the way humans do. After weeks of failure, someone finally had a clever idea. Use gravity. They would drag the enormous boulders up to the top of the quarry and push them over the edge. When the stones crashed down, they shattered into pieces small enough to use. It was back-breaking work. Every animal who could grip a rope, horses, cows, sheep, even the pigs when absolutely necessary, would strain together to drag those massive stones uphill. Sometimes it took an entire day just to move one boulder. No one worked harder than Boxer, the great draft horse. His strength seemed equal to all the other animals combined. When a boulder started slipping backward, threatening to drag everyone down with it, Boxer would dig in his hooves and hold the line alone. Watching Boxer work was both inspiring and heartbreaking. He would toil up that slope inch by inch, breath coming in great gasps, his sides matted with sweat. His hooves clawed desperately at the ground for every bit of traction. Clover, the motherly mare who cared deeply for her fellow animals, often warned Boxer not to push himself so hard. She could see what this labor was costing him. But Boxer only had two responses to any concern. "I will work harder," and "Napoleon is always right." Those two phrases had become Boxer's entire philosophy of life. Whatever problem arose, whatever doubt crept in, he simply repeated them like magic words. And somehow, saying them made him feel better, even when nothing actually improved. Boxer even arranged to wake up earlier than everyone else. And in his rare spare moments, he would go to the quarry alone and drag extra stones to the building site. It was as if he believed that if he just worked hard enough, everything would turn out right. Despite all this labor, the animals weren't starving, at least not yet. They had about the same amount of food as when the humans ran things. But there was a crucial difference. Now they weren't feeding lazy human masters too. That thought sustained them through the hardest days. Every bite of food stayed on the farm now, feeding those who actually did the work. It was a small comfort, but it was something real. But as summer wore on, new problems emerged. The farm needed things it simply couldn't produce: oil for lamps, nails for building, iron for horseshoes, and eventually they would need seeds, machinery, and tools for the windmill itself. How could animals get these things without dealing with humans? The question hung over the farm like a dark cloud. Then, one Sunday, Napoleon announced his solution. Animal Farm would begin trading with the neighboring human farms. They would sell hay and wheat, and later eggs from the hens, in exchange for the supplies they desperately needed. The windmill, Napoleon declared, was more important than any old principle. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Hadn't they promised never to trade with humans? Hadn't they sworn never to use money, never to become part of the human economic system? Some animals thought they remembered voting on exactly that, back in the early days after the Revolution. They were almost certain of it. Or were they? 4 young pigs tried to raise an objection, their voices timid but brave. But before they could say more than a few words, Napoleon's guard dogs erupted in ferocious growling. The young pigs fell silent immediately. Then, right on cue, the sheep began to chant. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, they bleated over and over, drowning out any remaining questions. It was hard to think clearly with all that noise. Napoleon reassured everyone that they wouldn't have to deal with humans directly. He had hired a human lawyer named Mr. Whymper to handle all the business arrangements. Napoleon himself would bear the burden of these unpleasant but necessary dealings. Later that day, Squealer, Napoleon's spokesman, made rounds through the farm. He was a small, fat pig with a remarkable talent for explaining things. Whatever doubts the animals had, Squealer could always smooth them away. That resolution against trading with humans? Never happened, Squealer assured them. Pure imagination, probably a lie started by Snowball, the traitor who had been expelled from the farm. When some animals still looked doubtful, Squealer had a clever question for them. "Is this written down anywhere?" he asked. "Do you have any proof?" Of course, nothing had been written down. The animals couldn't write. And just like that, the animals decided they must have been mistaken. Maybe they had only dreamed those old resolutions. Memory, after all, could play such tricks. Every Monday after that, Mr. Whymper came to the farm. He was a sly little man who had quickly realized there was money to be made from these unusual animals. The animals avoided him as much as possible, watching from a distance with a kind of dread. But there was one sight that helped the animals accept this new arrangement. Napoleon, their leader, would meet with Whymper while standing on all 4 legs. The human had to stand on 2. In a strange way, that made them feel proud. Around this time, something else happened that troubled some of the animals. The pigs moved out of the barn and into the farmhouse, the actual house where the human farmer used to live. Again, some animals felt sure there had been a rule against this. Hadn't they agreed that no animal would ever live in a house? Once more, Squealer appeared with a ready explanation. The pigs, Squealer explained, were the brains of the operation. They needed a quiet place to think and plan. Surely no one wanted the farm's leadership sleeping in a muddy sty. But then word spread that the pigs weren't just using the house. They were sleeping in the beds. Actual beds, with mattresses and pillows. Clover felt certain there had been a commandment against beds. Clover walked slowly to the barn where the 7 commandments were painted on the wall. These were the original rules of Animal Farm, established right after the Revolution. But Clover couldn't read very well. She could only make out individual letters. She asked Muriel, a goat who could read, to help her. "Read me the fourth commandment," Clover said, "the one about beds." Muriel studied the wall carefully and read the words aloud. "No animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets," Muriel read. With sheets? Clover frowned. Had those last two words always been there? She couldn't quite remember, but if it was written on the wall, it must be true. Right on cue, Squealer appeared with several dogs at his heels. A bed, he explained cheerfully, was simply a place to sleep. A pile of straw was technically a bed. The rule had only ever been against sheets, a human invention. The pigs, Squealer assured them, had removed all the sheets. They slept only between blankets, which was completely different. And didn't the pigs deserve comfort, with all the difficult thinking they had to do? Then Squealer asked the question he always asked when the animals had doubts. "Surely you don't want Jones to come back?" The mere mention of the cruel former farmer ended all argument. Days later, another announcement. The pigs would now sleep an hour later than everyone else. No one complained about that either. By now, complaining had become too exhausting to bother with. By autumn, the animals were exhausted, but the windmill was almost half complete. Looking at those stone walls rising against the sky, they could almost forget their aching bodies. This would change everything, they told themselves. It had to be worth it. Boxer worked harder than ever during the clear autumn weather. He would even sneak out at night to lay more stones by moonlight. In his mind, every extra hour brought their dream that much closer. The other animals would walk around the half-finished mill in their spare moments, marveling at what they had built. They had never imagined they could create something so impressive. Only old Benjamin the donkey refused to share their enthusiasm. When asked what he thought of the windmill, Benjamin would only say one thing. "Donkeys live a long time," he muttered. None of the other animals could figure out what he meant by that. Then November arrived, bringing rain and vicious winds. The construction had to stop. The animals retreated to their shelters and waited for the storms to pass. One night, the wind grew into a full gale. The farm buildings shook on their foundations. Tiles flew off roofs. Inside the henhouse, the chickens woke screaming from nightmares. They had all dreamed of gunshots. By morning, the storm had passed. The animals emerged from their shelters to survey the damage. A flagpole had fallen. An old elm tree had been torn from the ground like a weed. And then they saw the windmill. Or rather, they saw what was left of it. A cry of despair rose from every animal's throat. The windmill was gone, completely destroyed. All those stones they had hauled up the quarry, all those days of exhausting labor, lay scattered across the ground like broken bones. Everything they had worked for, demolished in a single night. The animals stood in stunned silence, too shocked to speak. They stared at the ruins of their dreams. Napoleon pushed through the crowd and paced back and forth, his tail twitching sharply. Suddenly, Napoleon stopped. His body went rigid. When he spoke, his voice was thunder. "Comrades!" Napoleon roared. "Do you know who is responsible for this? Do you know what enemy crept here in the night and destroyed our windmill?" The animals held their breath, waiting. Snowball! The name exploded from Napoleon like a curse. Snowball. The pig who had been driven from the farm months ago had supposedly returned to commit this act of sabotage. Napoleon claimed that Snowball had snuck onto the farm under cover of darkness. Driven by hatred and jealousy, the traitor had destroyed what he could never have built himself. Napoleon sentenced Snowball to death in absentia. The animals were horrified that anyone could be so wicked. Snowball had been one of them once. How could he do this? Anger began to replace their grief. Napoleon pointed to pig tracks in the mud near the windmill. Proof, he said, of Snowball's crime. The tracks led toward a hole in the hedge. Snowball had escaped, but he would pay for this treachery. A reward was announced. Half a bushel of apples for anyone who brought Snowball to justice. A full bushel for capturing him alive. The animals began imagining ways to catch the villain. But there was no time for vengeance yet. "No more delays," Napoleon cried. "We begin rebuilding this very morning." They would work through winter, through rain and shine, until the windmill stood again. The traitor Snowball would not win, Napoleon declared. Their plans would not change. The windmill would rise again, stronger than before. "Long live the windmill!" Napoleon shouted. "Long live Animal Farm!" And once again, the exhausted animals prepared to give everything they had. And so the animals faced the brutal winter ahead, carrying stones once more. They had learned to stop questioning, to stop remembering too clearly. After all, memory could play such tricks.